Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching Newsx World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. A UN commission says Israel commits genocide in Gaza, carrying out 4 of 5 acts defined in international law, including mass killings and starvation. Israel denounces the report as distorted and false. Israel launches a major ground offensive into Gaza City, with residents describing the night's heavy airstrikes as hell. The military calls the city Hamas's main stronghold, while Prime Minister Netanyahu faces international criticism. Russian strikes kill 2 and injure 9 in Zaporozhye as Moscow launches a major offensive in Donetsk, claiming new territory. Ukraine says its troops halt a push towards Pavlovsk, even as heavy fighting rages across the east. Spain says it will boycott next year's Eurovision if Israel takes part, making it the first of Europe's big 5 nations to issue such a threat. The European Broadcasting Union will decide in December whether Israel can compete in the 2026 contest. FBI Director Kash Patel faces Congress today over the investigation into the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. His testimony comes just hours before suspect Tyler Robinson appears in court. Luigi Mangione appears in New York State Court seeking to dismiss one indictment in the murder of United Health executive Brian Thompson. The 27-year-old, who has pleaded not guilty, has drawn attention amid rising fears of political violence in America. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania are to arrive in Britain for a historic second state visit, the first ever for a modern elected leader. The trip celebrates the US-UK special relationship and the upcoming 250th anniversary of America's founding. Now we start in the Middle East this hour, where the United Nations Human Rights Chief has called on Israel to immediately stop its ground assault on Gaza City, warning of mounting evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity and potentially more. High Commissioner Volker Turk stressed the impact on women, children and people with disabilities, saying the only response to this is stop the carnage. Let's listen in to what the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has to say on the issue.
It's absolutely clear that this carnage must stop, and it has to stop at once. I can only think of what it means for women, for malnourished children, for people with disabilities if they are again attacked in this way. And I have to say the only response to this is stop the carnage. It's also important. The whole world screams for peace. Palestinians, Israelis scream for peace. Everyone wants an end to this. And what we see is a further escalation which is totally and utterly unacceptable. And it is important for the people of Gaza. They cannot sustain yet another intensification of violence and destruction and killings and lack of humanitarian assistance that needs.
Meanwhile, the European Commission will adopt new sanctions against Israel on Wednesday over its Gaza war, targeting trade provisions on EU-Israel agreements. Spokesperson Paula Pino confirmed the measures following earlier proposals by Ursula von der Leyen. Let's listen in to her statements.
En réunion du collège, les commissaires adopteront un paquet de mesures concernant Israël, notamment une proposition de la Commission visant à suspendre certaines dispositions commerciales de l'accord euro-méditerranéen entre l'Union européenne et Israël.
We're now joined by Ariel Whitman, who is the op-ed editor and senior reporter at Globe's newspaper. He joins us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Thank you very much for joining us, Ariel, here on the programme. We first of all heard there from the United Nations Human Rights Chief warning of war crimes and crimes against humanity, which could soon be found against the state of Israel. How are the people of Israel viewing these consistent statements coming out of Israel, coming out of the United Nations, coming out of other humanitarian bodies, and of course coming out of allies and states alike? What are your thoughts, Ariel?
I think that if you're asking how the general Israeli public looks at this, is that way before October 7th, we've had the UN has not been seen as a, let's say, a fair observer of what's happening here. And on October 7th itself, as we all know, we had numerous UN employees participate in the attack. I have a friend whose son's body was taken by a UN worker with a UN uniform on him. And so the fact that we have to listen to lectures by people at the UN is, to me, unbelievable. Also, if you look at the actual contents of this report, which I did leading up in the past few minutes, just reading about what they were actually saying and what were the actual facts that they were looking at, meaning what were the numbers that they had coming from. And entirely they come from the Gaza Ministry of Health, meaning Hamas. Entirely, the entire report does not even mention the fact that a lot of these places where the war and the battles are happening are in civilian areas because Hamas uses them as launching pads and as places where they are warring with Israeli soldiers. They did not mention the hostages once in the entire report. They did not mention the amount of food that has gone in objectively by all sources in the past few months. The entire report seems to look at the war from the Hamas standpoint, literally take out the other side of the warring. There's two sides to every war, so only one side pretty much is mentioned in the entire report. And then we are supposed to look at it and say, as an Israeli public, this is something that we should be shocked that our government is doing. I am not a supporter of the government here. Most Israelis, according to the polls at this point, aren't. But what we do support is that Israel is just and right in this war, and that reports like these are ridiculous. There are a lot of problems in Gaza. The problems are not because there's a genocidal intent or that there is, starvation happening purposefully by Israel. The problems are very, very complicated and complex, and they need to be solved. And just for example, you mentioned Volpe, whatever his name is, from the UN, and he said, we just need the conflict to stop. We all want the conflict to stop. Not one Israeli wants the conflict to continue. I have friends right now. I was a combat soldier when I was in the army, and my reservist friends are in Gaza right now, going into Gaza City. No one wants them to be there. No one wants more soldiers to die and lose limbs. It's ridiculous.
Ariel, if you don't mind me interrupting, if you, no matter the information that Israel puts out, that the fact of the matter is that the world does see these reports, which of course leads Israel to seemingly more and more isolate itself, given its responses to them. What do you think the long-term effects? Let's say Israel fulfills its objectives here, destroys Hamas, releases all the hostages. Do you see Israel coming back to the international community in the same way that it was prior?
Very difficult to say what will happen. It all depends on how much longer this goes on. In my opinion, this is the amount of time that this has gone on is indefensible for the Israeli public and what they think of their government. And so people should know that the Israeli government is facing extreme pressure from within because people are very, very angry at the amount of time this war has been taking. And Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday that Israel has to be ready for sanctions and that the economy will be hurt very badly. And so he said we need to, close our belts and, we won't have enough money to be an open economy because we won't have trading partners here. So it's a big problem. And people are looking at, just on the economic side, Israelis' quality of life will be going down probably in the next few years if this continues. But on the other hand, if we finish this war fast and we get to a deal with the Saudis and some of the other countries that before the war were looking to do deals with Israel, theoretically that could be a great opportunity. But we have to get this as fast as possible finished. We have to finish Hamas, because stopping the war right now, which would be great for the next few months maybe, but leaving Hamas in place would be a disaster for Israel on the world stage. It would teach Israel's enemies that it's worth it to start a war with Israel as long as you hide behind civilians and take Israelis as hostages. And so that would be even bigger disaster than being isolated on the world stage. So I think we have to take both sides into account and say Israel has to finish the war fast. It has to be a quick, fast, swift, and strong move. And on the other hand, it has to be, finished. Okay. It cannot be a half-hearted approach.
Ariel, do stay with us. We have further updates from the region. Qatar and the United States are nearing the finalization of a strengthened defense cooperation agreement, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed. This comes after Israel's recent strike on Hamas political leaders in Doha, the Qatari capital, that had heightened security concerns. Qatar, which hosts the largest US military base in the Middle East, expressed the need for an expedited defense pact with the US in response to the attack. While discussing his visit to Doha, Rubio emphasized Qatar's crucial role in mediating ceasefire efforts in the ongoing Gaza conflict. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson, Majid al-Ansari, thanked the US for supporting its mediation role. Let's listen in to his statement.
Of course, understand very fully that there is a huge appreciation from the U.S. for our role as mediators that has been stated in all the official statements by Israeli officials, including President Trump. And we highly appreciate that the United States is in partnership with us over a lot of these efforts, not only in Gaza, but around the world. So I won't anticipate, any change in the position today.
Ariel, Israel, of course, they struck these Hamas leaders in Qatar, killing 5 members of Hamas and 1 Qatari official. Do people in Israel acknowledge that this risks dragging Washington's closest Gulf partner into Israel's war and, of course, threatening the Abraham Accords and destabilizing the region?
I don't know if that's the calculus that Israelis in general are making. I do think that in general, I just reference back to the Osama bin Laden assassination when America took him out in Pakistan. And obviously the United States did not, respect Pakistan's sovereignty. And so we have a situation here, which is in principle the same, in my opinion, where you have the leaders of an organization that went out and killed and butchered over 1,200 Israelis. And they're living in 5-star hotels in a country that accepts them, that gives them refuge, that gives them money, that gives them, everything that they need. And so Israel did what it needed to do, and it didn't work. But Israel needs to put on the table that this will be happening again and again, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's in Qatar, whether it's in other places. We cannot accept that countries that are allies of our allies or even allies of ours on principle are actually harboring people who are giving support and sending people to actually murder our citizens. It's something that any other country would not accept. And if we have the capabilities to take them out and to do this and to show, even just as a statement, that you cannot be safe anywhere, okay, then we should do it. And we also did it in the past in the 72 Olympics in Munich, where the Israeli Olympians were murdered by Palestinian terrorists. The Israeli Mossad went and hunted them down one by one in Europe. And I think this is going to be the playbook, whether it's openly shooting people at them from planes or assassinating them in different locations. This is what we should be doing, and I think the Israeli public stands behind it.
Okay, Ariel Whitman, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. We now move over to Europe next, where police patrolled Windsor Castle today as security tightened ahead of US President Donald Trump and Melania's state visit this week. The couple will experience British royal pageantry on Wednesday, including a tour state banquet, military flypast and a gun salute. The UK aims to strengthen defence security and energy ties with Washington, with hopes of finalising lower tariffs on steel and aluminium. On Thursday, Prime Minister Keir Starmer will host Trump at Chequers to discuss international issues, including Ukraine. The visit, marking Trump's second state visit, is a huge opportunity for both leaders. While Trump revels in royal pomp, Starmer seeks to shift focus to global matters. Security is tight, with Thames Valley Police deploying Marine units around Windsor. The visit also includes a £10 billion agreement with Google and finance firms, committing significant investments. Trump's visit promises a blend of ceremony and politics, highlighting the, quote, unbreakable friendship between the UK and the United States. We're now joined by Glenn Grant, who's an ex-advisor to the Defence Minister of Ukraine, and he joins us live from Riga, Latvia, to discuss this further. Glenn, pleasure to have you on the programme. Glenn, pomp, that is certainly what it is going to be, and a second state visit for Donald Trump. He has been a vocal supporter, fan, whatever you call it, of the royal family. Do you think that this second state visit is going to be enough to swing the US president in the way of Keir Starmer's outlook when it comes to European security and, of course, Ukraine?
Oh, that is a serious question, because Trump arrives at quite a challenging time, which I'll talk about for Starmer, which I'll talk about it secondly. But the public are not happy that Trump is coming, and in fact, an awful lot of other politicians are not happy that Trump is coming, and you will see from the program, if you actually sort of pull the detail up, that the majority of the program is keeping President Trump firmly locked into Windsor Castle. And even the pomp and circumstance is all in and around Windsor Castle. So basically, he's being saved from the dirty British public, who are likely to throw tomatoes or things at him because of the way he's been acting recently. So hopefully the protection and the pomp and circumstance that comes in on that side will be sufficient to leave him in good humour. But he's got to deal with Starmer, a Starmer who is under real pressure because the government has been failing in the first place, and secondly because Starmer has just had to remove the British ambassador to USA because of his links to Jeffrey Epstein. And I can't see that there's any way that this subject is not going to come up at some stage. So Trump may be there full of pomp and circumstance, but it may not be quite as happy a visit as perhaps his nice, easy visit that he had with the Queen last time he came.
Yes, Glenn, thank you very much for your insight. It's always a pleasure having you on the programme, and we, of course, will continue to bring you all the updates on Trump's second visit to the United Kingdom as soon as we get them. We now move over once again to the United States, where US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the Chinese feel that a possible deal and that recent talks have been productive. He confirmed both sides need to meet again before November the 10th, and that a final agreement is expected after President Trump speaks with President Xi on Friday. While China brought a long list of demands to the table, Bessent described the negotiations as respectful and fulsome. On TikTok, Bessent says terms will be highly satisfactory for US interests. While commercial details won't be revealed just yet, he says they'll come to light in the coming days or weeks. The deal still needs approval from China, but Bessent notes most terms were finalised in the spring. We're now joined by Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Jayjit, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent calls these talks respectful and fulsome. Do you believe that shows some genuine thaw here in US-China trade tensions?
Absolutely, yes. I think you've picked up the key terms and the words that were used. Respectful is not a word that was ever used by the current US administration till this particular case. So clearly it represents a more productive conversation, which was respectful to both the teams, the nations and the negotiators involved. So that gives hope to the rest of the world, because the US-China trade deal is important for the rest of the world because of the significant tariffs that US put in China. Chinese goods has been going to the rest of the economies and dumping them at very, very low price. They've also been choking minerals such as the rare earth metal, germanium chloride, and not just to US, but to the rest of the world, including key economies such as Japan and India and so on. So I think we all are waiting for a good outcome out of this deal so that we can go back to business as usual. And clearly the words spoken from by Wessler are quite positive. However, the other part of the deal was the splitting of the US operations of TikTok and moving that under a US business ownership. We haven't heard much from there. We are not sure whether that's something that's really happening or not, although there has been statements saying, which kind of indicates that maybe perhaps China is agreeing to it. But to most people who are watching the development, it doesn't seem likely that China will really agree to it. And we haven't heard the Chinese part of what really happened in that conversation.
Yes, Jayjit Bhattacharya, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme, as always. We now move over to the United States once again, where the Trump administration is set to appeal a US appeals court ruling that blocks the president from firing federal Governor Lisa Cook. This marks the first time in history a president has sought to remove a sitting Fed governor since the institution's founding in 1913. On Monday, the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled against the administration's bid to remove Cook, an appointee of President Biden. The court also denied a request to delay a judge's order temporarily, preventing her removal. Judge Giacob had ruled that the claims of mortgage fraud against Cook weren't strong enough to justify her dismissal. The Trump administration now has until the Supreme Court's next steps to act, with Cook expected to attend the Fed's policy meeting this week. We are now joined by Matthew Vadum. He is an American journalist and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us here on the program. Matthew, how unprecedented was this original move? This is the first time since the founding of the Fed, since 1913, that a US president has tried to fire an Fed governor. How extraordinary is this from President Trump?
Well, extraordinary is exactly the right word. It's unprecedented. No president has ever tried before Donald Trump to fire a sitting governor of the Federal Reserve System. So he is the first. And the legal issue here is whether he can do it under the statute, the federal law that governs the Fed, called the Federal Reserve Act. It says that governors may be removed, members of the Board of Governors may be removed for cause. But cause has typically been understood to mean that has been understood to mean covering their behavior while members of the Federal Reserve. Whereas Lisa Cook is accused by the Trump administration and the U.S. Justice Department of lying on mortgage documents prior to becoming a member of the Federal Reserve System's Board of Governors. So that is the precise legal issue, as I understand it, that is now appears headed to the U.S. Supreme Court after the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit rejected the Trump administration's appeal.
Yes, and could this set a precedent that politicizes the Fed in ways that we haven't seen before, possibly?
Only if Lisa Cook's firing is upheld. If it is not upheld, well, I guess, or let me rephrase that. Maybe it would set a precedent either way. But the existing, the status quo, the traditional understanding is that Federal Reserve governors cannot be fired. Trump has tried to disrupt that status quo. And so far, his efforts to do so have been rebuffed by the courts. If ultimately the courts allow him to fire Lisa Cook, then yes, that would set a precedent. Otherwise, the previous convention, the previous understanding would remain in place. Now, whether the Supreme Court will allow it is an open question. The Supreme Court has allowed President Donald Trump to fire many members of independent federal agencies, but it has been particularly protective of the Federal Reserve System. In fact, I don't recall which case it was in, but a few months ago, it made a ruling specifically saying that, or at least implying that it would be unable to allow a Federal Reserve governor to be fired because of the statutory protection, the protection afforded governors in the Federal Reserve Act. So, it would seem at the outset that President Donald Trump is fighting an uphill battle in trying to get Lisa Cook removed, but you never know what the justices of the Supreme Court are going to do. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with that.
Yes, Matthew Verdum, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. We now move on and finish this hour with news from the entertainment world, where sadly Robert Redford, an actor, director and environmentalist, has passed away at the age of 89. According to his publicist, Redford died at his home in Utah. His passion for the arts led him to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. A short time in Europe and on Broadway quickly paved the way for Hollywood. He was known for iconic roles in films such as Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and All the President's Men. Redford also made significant contributions to the film industry as a director with Ordinary People and The River Runs Through It, which were among his most acclaimed works. As an environmentalist, Redford was deeply committed to preserving the American West and also founded the Sundance Institute that supports independent filmmakers through the famous Sundance Film Festival. Redford's contributions to film and environmentalism have left a lasting legacy. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.